Billionaire opened the hospital room door in anger until he saw his ex-wife holding newborn triplets. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now I sit back and enjoy every detail. The leather interior of the Bentley Continental GT still smelled new, but Caleb Hargrove's knuckles were white against the steering wheel as he navigated through the evening traffic of downtown Seattle. At 34, he commanded boardrooms with the same precision he now used to weave between lanes. His steel gray eyes focused with laser intensity. His tailored charcoal suit, worth more than most people's monthly salary, remained perfectly pressed despite the tension radiating from his 6'2" frame. The notification on his phone had arrived 20 minutes ago. A single message that shattered the carefully constructed walls of his post-divorce existence. Caleb's dark hair, meticulously styled each morning, now showed traces of his fingers running through it. A nervous habit he thought he'd conquered years ago. His sharp jawline, usually clean-shaven to perfection, bore the shadow of a man who'd forgotten to maintain his usual routine since reading those words. He pulled into the parking garage of Seattle General Hospital, the engine's purr dying into silence. The familiar scent of antiseptic and floor cleaner hit him as soon as the elevator doors opened on the maternity ward. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor with each measured step toward room 314. Outside the door he paused. Through the small window he could see her, Naomi Carter. No, she'd taken back her maiden name after the divorce. She sat propped against white pillows, her honey blonde hair falling in gentle waves past her shoulders, though it looked like she hadn't brushed it in days. Even exhausted, she possessed that natural elegance that had first captured his attention 5 years ago, at the university lecture where she'd been guest speaking about contemporary American literature. Her sage green eyes, usually bright with intelligence and warmth, now held the weight of sleepless nights. At 30, she still had that soft beauty that made strangers stop and look twice, the kind of face that belonged in classical paintings rather than hospital rooms. Her fair complexion, usually glowing, appeared pale against the hospital gown, but it wasn't Naomi that made Caleb's breath catch in his throat. It was the 3 tiny bundles she held against her chest. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle. The businessman who'd closed million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat suddenly felt like his legs might give out. The door opened with a soft click. Naomi's eyes lifted to meet his, and for a moment, the world stopped. No anger flashed in her gaze, just profound exhaustion and something that looked almost like relief. Caleb. Her voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from fatigue. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The room felt impossibly small despite its standard hospital dimensions. The beeping of monitors created a rhythmic backdrop to the silence stretching between them. Miranda sent you the message. It wasn't a question. Naomi nodded slightly, careful not to disturb the sleeping infants. I told her not to, but she said... She paused, swallowing hard. She said some things are bigger than pride. Caleb moved closer, his eyes fixed on the 3 small forms nestled against Naomi's chest. 2 boys and a girl, according to Miranda's message, born at 32 weeks, fighting for every breath in their tiny lungs. They're so small, he heard himself say. The doctors say they're doing well for their gestational age, but they'll need to stay in the NICU for several more weeks. He reached the edge of the bed, his expensive cologne mixing with the sterile hospital air. Up close, he could see the delicate features of each child. Button noses, impossibly small fingers, wisps of dark hair that reminded him of his own. How long have you been here alone? 3 days. Naomi's voice cracked slightly. Since they were born. The weight of that admission hit him like a physical blow. 3 days. She'd been facing this monumental challenge completely alone while he'd been in his penthouse office, closing deals and building his empire. The pregnancy, he started, then stopped. The question felt too big for the fragile atmosphere of the room. I found out a month after the divorce was finalized. She looked down at the babies, her voice growing softer. I almost called you 100 times. But you'd made your choice and I wasn't going to trap you with guilt or obligation. Caleb sank into the chair beside the bed, his usual commanding presence reduced to something raw and uncertain. The babies were so peaceful, so vulnerable. The boy on the left had his tiny fist pressed against his cheek. The girl in the middle made soft sucking motions with her rosebud lips. The other boy's chest rose and fell with determined regularity. What are their names? I haven't named them yet. Naomi's admission came with a tremor of vulnerability. I kept thinking that if something happened, if they didn't make it, she couldn't finish the sentence. The silence that followed was profound. Caleb studied the woman who'd once shared his bed, his dreams, his life. The woman he'd walked away from because he'd convinced himself he wasn't capable of being what she needed. The woman who'd carried his children through what must have been the most difficult months of her life. "They're going to make it," he said quietly, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. Naomi looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw a flicker of the woman who'd once believed in him completely. "The nurses need to take them back to the NICU soon," she said softly. "But would you like to?" She didn't finish the question, but Caleb understood. His hands, steady in million-dollar negotiations, shook as he reached for the baby boy on the left. The moment that tiny, warm weight settled into his arms, everything Caleb thought he knew about himself crumbled. The baby opened his eyes, steel gray, just like his father's, and seemed to focus on Caleb's face with startling intensity. In that instant, Caleb felt something shift deep in his chest, something he'd spent years trying to avoid. Love. Pure, terrifying, unconditional love. As he held his son for the first time, one thought echoed in his mind with devastating clarity. His entire life had just changed, and there was no going back. What choice would you have made in Caleb's position? Stay and fight for a family you walked away from, or leave to avoid causing more pain? The next morning found Caleb in his downtown Seattle office, but his mind was anywhere except on the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, yet all he could see were three tiny faces and the exhaustion etched in Naomi's features. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt that impossibly small weight in his arms again. His assistant, Bethany, knocked and entered with her usual efficiency. "Mr. Hargrove, the Tokyo investors are waiting for your video conference." Caleb looked at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "Tokyo? The Yamamoto deal, sir. You've been working on it for 6 months. 6 months. Yesterday, that deal had been his priority. Today, it felt like someone else's life entirely. Reschedule it," he said, loosening his silver tie. Bethany's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose slightly. In 8 years of working for Caleb Hargrove, she'd never heard him postpone a major deal. "For when, sir?" "I don't know. Later this week. Next week. Just handle it." After she left, Caleb found himself staring at his phone. Miranda's message was still there, along with the photo that had changed everything. He studied each tiny face again, memorizing features he'd only glimpsed for a few precious minutes. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen made his jaw tighten. Richard Blackstone, his business partner and oldest friend. "You missed the Yamamoto call." Richard's voice was sharp with annoyance. "That's not like you." Something came up. Something more important than a $150 million acquisition. Caleb closed his eyes. "Yes." The silence stretched before Richard spoke again, his tone shifting. "What's going on, Caleb? You sound different." "I'm a father." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb had never said them out loud before. They felt foreign on his tongue, yet somehow more real than any business title he'd ever held. "What the hell are you talking about? You and Naomi have been divorced for over a year." "She was pregnant, I didn't know." "Jesus Christ." Richard's voice dropped. "How pregnant?" "They were born 3 days ago. Triplets. Premature." Another silence, this one heavier. Richard had been the best man at their wedding, had watched their marriage deteriorate, had even encouraged Caleb to cut his losses when things got difficult. "Are you sure they're yours?" The question hit Caleb like a slap. "Don't. I'm just saying, man, think about this logically. She never told you, never asked for money." "I said don't." Caleb's voice carried a warning that made Richard back down immediately. Okay, so what's your plan? Write a check and set up a trust fund?" Caleb realized he had no plan. For the first time in his adult life, he was operating without a strategy, without calculating outcomes and risk assessments. "I don't know." "Well, figure it out fast. This kind of thing can destroy everything we've built if it's not handled properly." After hanging up, Caleb stared out at the city below. Handle it properly, as if his children were a business problem to be managed. By noon, he found himself back at Seattle General Hospital, carrying a bouquet of white lilies, Naomi's favorite flowers from when they were married. He'd remembered without thinking about it. Naomi was alone when he entered, looking even more fragile in the harsh daylight filtering through the room's single window. She'd changed into her own clothes, a soft cream sweater that he recognized, paired with dark jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, revealing the elegant line of her neck. "You came back," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Where are they?" "NICU. They're only allowed out for feeding every few hours." She gestured to the chair beside her bed. "The doctors say they're responding well to treatment, gaining weight slowly." He handed her the flowers and something shifted in her expression when she recognized them. "You remembered." "I remember a lot of things." He settled into the chair, noting how she cradled the bouquet as if it were precious. "Naomi, we need to talk. Really talk." She nodded, but her walls were up now. He could see it in the way she held herself, protective and distant. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you made it very clear you didn't want complications in your life." Her voice was steady, but he caught the underlying hurt. "You said I deserved someone who could be present, someone who wouldn't see love as an obligation." The words hit their mark because they were his words, spoken on that terrible night when he'd convinced himself that leaving was the kindest thing he could do. That was different, was it? She turned to face him fully. "Caleb, you worked 18-hour days. You missed our anniversary dinner for a conference call with London. You forgot my birthday because you were in Dubai closing a deal. You think adding children to that equation would have made it better? I would have tried. You were already trying, that was the problem." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was trying too. We were both trying so hard to make it work that we forgot we were supposed to be happy." He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the truth was a heavy weight in his chest. She wasn't wrong. He had been absent, even when he was physically there. His mind had always been on the next deal, the next challenge, the next way to prove his worth through success. "The pregnancy was high risk," Naomi continued, her voice growing softer. "Bed rest for the last 2 months. I had to stop teaching. There were so many doctor appointments, so many scares." She paused, looking down at the flowers. "I needed you, but I couldn't ask. Not when you'd already made your choice. You should have told me." "Should I?" Her green eyes met his directly. "Tell me honestly, Caleb. If I had called you 2 months ago and said I was pregnant and scared, what would you have done?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Caleb opened his mouth to answer, then closed it, because he wasn't sure. The man he'd been 2 months ago might have seen it as exactly what Richard had suggested. A complication to be managed with money and lawyers. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "At least you're honest." She gave him a small, sad smile. "The Caleb I married would have dropped everything and been here. But that man disappeared somewhere along the way, didn't he?" Her words cut deep because they were true. Somewhere in his climb to the top, he'd lost pieces of himself. The man who'd once surprised her with handwritten poems, who'd spent entire Sundays reading beside her in bed, who'd talked about having a family someday. That man had been buried under deadlines and profit margins. "What if I told you I want to find him again?" Naomi studied his face for a long moment. "I'd say that's something you have to do for yourself first. Not for me, not for them, for yourself." A soft knock interrupted them. A nurse entered, smiling warmly. "Mrs. Carter, it's time for the baby's feeding. Would you like to come to the NICU?" Naomi started to stand, then looked at Caleb hesitantly. Would you like to come with me?" As they walked down the hospital corridor together, Caleb felt the weight of unspoken possibilities. In the NICU, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the determined breathing of tiny fighters, he understood that this wasn't just about proving he could be a better man. It was about discovering if the man Naomi had fallen in love with still existed somewhere beneath the layers of ambition and armor. But as they approached the 3 incubators, Caleb noticed something that made his blood run cold. A man in a white coat stood beside one of them, making notes on a clipboard. Dr. Harrison, according to his name tag. And the way Naomi's entire posture changed when she saw him, the soft smile that appeared on her lips, told Caleb everything he needed to know. He wasn't the only man who'd been there for her during these difficult months. Dr. Michael Harrison was everything Caleb wasn't expecting. Tall, but not imposing. Handsome in an understated way, with kind brown eyes and sandy hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it after a long shift. Mid-30s probably, with the confident but gentle manner of someone who spent his days saving lives rather than closing deals. When he looked up from the clipboard and saw Naomi approaching, his entire face lit up with genuine warmth. "Naomi, how are you feeling today? You look a little better." The familiarity in his voice, the way he said her name like he'd been saying it for months, made Caleb's jaw clench involuntarily. "Much better, thank you." Naomi's smile was softer than any expression Caleb had seen from her since yesterday. Michael, I'd like you to meet Caleb Hargrove, the baby's father. Doctor. Harrison's eyes shifted to Caleb, and there was a moment of assessment that felt like being measured and found lacking. The doctor extended his hand with professional courtesy, but Caleb didn't miss the slight protective stance he took near Naomi. Mr. Hargrove, I've heard about you. The handshake was firm, neither man backing down first. Caleb wondered exactly what Naomi had told this doctor about their marriage, about why he hadn't been here for the birth. Doctor, Harrison has been incredible throughout everything, Naomi said, moving toward the first incubator. He's the one who delivered the babies when complications arose. Just doing my job, Michael said modestly, but his eyes followed Naomi with unmistakable care. Though I have to admit, your babies are some of the strongest preemies I've seen. They get that from their mother. The comment was innocent enough, but the way he said it, with intimate knowledge of Naomi's strength, made Caleb feel like an intruder in what should have been his moment. How are they today? Naomi asked, peering into the first incubator where one of the boys lay sleeping, tiny chest rising and falling with determined rhythm. Baby A gained another 2 ounces since yesterday. Baby B is off the feeding tube as of this morning. And little Miss C here, he gestured to the third incubator, is breathing completely on her own now. Caleb moved closer, studying his children with fresh eyes. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the NICU, they looked even more fragile than yesterday, but there was something unmistakably resilient about them, the way their tiny fists were clenched, as if they were fighting for every breath, every heartbeat. Can I hold them? He asked. Of course. Dr. Harrison replied, but there was something in his tone, a slight hesitation as if he needed to assess whether Caleb was worthy of the privilege. Let me get baby B ready for you. He's the most stable right now. As the doctor carefully lifted the infant from the incubator, Caleb noticed how practiced his movements were, how naturally he handled the delicate transfer. This wasn't his first time helping Naomi with the babies. The warm weight settled into Caleb's arms again, and once more the world seemed to shift on its axis. The baby, his son, opened those steel-gray eyes and stared up at him with startling focus. He knows you, Naomi said softly, moving to stand beside him. Babies can sense their parents, even this young. But it was Dr. Harrison who added, Naomi talks to them about you sometimes, when she's here during the late-night feedings. Caleb looked at Naomi sharply. You talk about me? A flush of color rose in her cheeks. I tell them stories about their father, about... She trailed off, looking embarrassed. About what? About the man I fell in love with, she said quietly. The one who used to read poetry aloud just to watch me smile. The one who proposed during a thunderstorm because he said our love was as powerful as nature itself. The memory hit Caleb like a physical blow. He'd forgotten about the poetry, about the way he used to surprise her with romantic gestures that seemed to flow naturally from his heart. When had he stopped being that man? Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. I should check on my other patients. Naomi, remember what I said about getting rest. You can't take care of them if you don't take care of yourself. There it was again, that protective concern that spoke of more than professional interest. After he left, Caleb and Naomi stood in silence watching their children sleep. The NICU hummed with quiet activity around them, nurses moving efficiently between incubators, machines monitoring tiny lives with digital precision. How long have you known him? Caleb asked finally. Michael? Since my first emergency room visit at 28 weeks. I was having contractions, scared out of my mind. He was the attending physician who talked me through it, who made sure the baby stayed put for another month. And after that, Naomi was quiet for a long moment. He checked on me regularly, made sure I was following the bed rest orders, brought me books from the hospital library when I was going stir-crazy. Books. Medical journals, actually. And sometimes poetry collections. She glanced at him sideways. He remembered I was a literature professor. The picture was becoming clearer, and Caleb didn't like what he was seeing. While he'd been building his empire, another man had been there for his wife, his ex-wife, during the most vulnerable time of her life. Naomi. His voice came out rougher than intended. Is there something between you and Dr. Harrison? She turned to face him fully, and he saw a flash of the fire that had first drawn him to her. Would that bother you? Yes. The answer came without hesitation, surprising them both with its vehemence. Why? Her green eyes searched his face. You're the one who left, Caleb. You're the one who said we wanted different things, that I deserved better. I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe you were. Her voice was soft but firm. Maybe I do deserve someone who puts family first. Someone who doesn't see love as a weakness or vulnerability as a liability. The words stung because they were true, but they also ignited something in Caleb that had been dormant for too long. The fighting spirit that had built his empire, now focused on something far more important than money. What if I told you I was wrong? What if I said I want another chance? I'd say that's easy to claim when you're holding your son for the second time in your life. Her voice carried pain that ran deeper than anger. Caleb, I spent 5 years loving you so hard it nearly broke me. I can't do that again. Not when these three need me to behold. A soft cry from one of the incubators drew their attention. Baby C, their daughter, was stirring, her tiny face scrunched in preparation for a full-scale protest. Naomi moved immediately to comfort her, and watching her natural maternal instincts, Caleb felt the full weight of everything he'd missed. Not just the pregnancy and birth, but months of Naomi becoming a mother, while facing her fears alone. I want to be here, he said as Naomi gently lifted their daughter. Not just financially, I want to be present. For how long? The question came sharp and immediate. Until your next big deal? Until Tokyo or Dubai or wherever needs your attention more than we do. Before he could answer, Dr. Harrison reappeared. Sorry to interrupt, but visiting hours in the NICU are ending soon. Naomi, you should get some rest. I'll drive her home, Caleb said immediately. Both Naomi and the doctor looked surprised. Dr. Harrison recovered first. Actually, I was planning to take her myself. I get off shift in 20 minutes. The territorial undercurrent was unmistakable now. Two men, both claiming concern for the same woman, both with legitimate reasons to be in her life. Naomi looked between them, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I can take a cab. No, both men said simultaneously. The awkward silence that followed was broken by Naomi's soft laugh, the first genuinely amused sound Caleb had heard from her since his return. You know what? Caleb can drive me. Michael, thank you, but you've done enough for one day. As they walked toward the elevator, Caleb felt a small victory in her choice, but victory turned complicated when she spoke quietly beside him. I chose you because I need to know something, Caleb. I need to know if you're here because you want to be or because you feel obligated to be. Because if it's obligation, please just walk away now. These babies and I have been through enough uncertainty. The elevator doors closed around them, and Caleb realized he was about to face the most important test of his life, proving that the man Naomi had fallen in love with wasn't gone forever. But first, he had to figure out if that man had ever really existed, or if he'd just been an illusion wrapped in poetry and thunderstorm proposals. The drive to Naomi's apartment was suffused with the kind of silence that held the weight of years. Caleb's hands gripped the steering wheel as he navigated the familiar streets of Capitol Hill, muscle memory guiding him toward the neighborhood where they'd once shared dreams of forever. He'd expected her to move somewhere different after the divorce, to create distance from their shared history. Instead, she'd chosen an apartment just 4 blocks from their old place, a charming brick building with ivy climbing the walls and window boxes that she'd probably planted herself. You stayed in the neighborhood, he observed as he pulled into a parking space. The elementary school here has an excellent literature program. I was thinking about the future. Her voice carried the practical tone of a woman who'd learned to plan for contingencies. Before I knew about them, I mean. Now I'm just grateful it's close to the hospital. Caleb turned off the engine but made no move to get out. In the amber glow of the streetlight, Naomi looked younger somehow, like the woman he'd married rather than the exhausted mother he'd found in the hospital. Can I walk you up? She hesitated, and he could see her weighing the decision. Okay, but just to the door. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor, and as they climbed the narrow staircase, Caleb caught glimpses of the life she'd built without him. Hardwood floors polished to a warm gleam, walls painted in the soft sage green that had always been her favorite color. Through the open door, he could see a cozy living room with an overstuffed cream sofa, bookshelves lining every available wall, and, his breath caught, the antique writing desk he'd given her for their first anniversary. You kept it? He said, nodding toward the desk. Naomi followed his gaze and shrugged. I do my best writing there. Some things transcend personal history. She turned to face him in the doorway, clearly intending this to be where they parted ways. But Caleb found himself reluctant to leave, to return to his empty penthouse where the silence would be filled with everything he should have said. Naomi, when you told the babies about me, About the man you fell in love with, what did you say? The question seemed to surprise her. She leaned against the doorframe, considering her answer. I told them about the night we met, do you remember? You were at my lecture on modern American poetry, and afterward you came up and quoted Neruda to me. Love is so short, forgetting is so long. You said it was beautiful but wrong. That real love doesn't fade. It just gets buried under life sometimes. A soft smile played at the corners of her mouth. I thought you were either incredibly romantic or completely arrogant. Both, probably. Definitely both. Her smile widened slightly. Then you asked if I wanted to get coffee and discuss why Pablo Neruda was a pessimist. The memory was vivid now. How she'd laughed at his audacity. How her eyes had sparkled with intelligence and amusement. How he'd known in that moment that his carefully ordered life was about to become wonderfully complicated. We talked until the cafe closed, he continued. And then we walked around the city for 3 more hours because neither of us wanted the conversation to end. You were wearing a yellow dress with tiny flowers on it. You kept gesturing with your hands when you got passionate about a point, and I kept thinking I'd never met anyone who made literature sound like music. Naomi's expression softened with remembered tenderness. You walked me home and asked if you could see me again. But instead of asking for my number, you asked what my favorite poem was. How Do I Love Thee? By Elizabeth Barrett Browning. You said it was cliché, but you didn't care because it was honest. And the next day, you showed up at my office with 43 roses, 1 for each line of the sonnet. And you'd memorized the entire thing. They stood there in the hallway, lost in a memory that felt both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. Caleb could see the exact moment when Naomi remembered why that man had been so dangerous to her heart, and why losing him had hurt so deeply. What happened to us? He asked quietly. Life, she said simply. Success. The pressure to maintain what we'd built instead of enjoying it. She paused, looking down at her hands. Do you know when I knew we were in trouble? He shook his head. It was our 3rd anniversary. I'd planned this elaborate dinner, made all your favorite foods. I was so excited to tell you that I'd gotten the promotion to department head, but you came home at 11:30, exhausted from some emergency meeting, and you ate cold pasta while scrolling through emails on your phone. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He remembered that night now, the disappointment in her eyes, the way she'd quietly cleared the dishes while he'd convinced himself that his work was for their future. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I know. That almost made it worse. If you'd been deliberately cruel, I could have been angry. But you were just absent, even when you were right there next to me. A door opened down the hall, and an elderly woman peered out curiously. Naomi waved with practiced politeness. I should let you get some rest, Caleb said, though every instinct told him to fight for more time. Caleb. She touched his arm gently, and the contact sent electricity through him. I want you to know that I never doubted you loved me, but love without presence is just a beautiful idea, and I needed more than ideas. As he drove back to his penthouse, Naomi's words echoed in his mind. His apartment felt even more sterile than usual. All glass and steel and expensive art that impressed clients, but had never felt like home. The only warmth came from a single framed photo on his nightstand. Naomi laughing on their wedding day, her hand in his, both of them believing they had forever figured out. He'd kept the photo through the divorce, through the months of telling himself he'd made the right choice. Now it felt like evidence of a crime. The murder of something beautiful through sheer neglect. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard.
Whoa.
Yamamoto is threatening to walk. Fix this. For the first time in his career, Caleb deleted a business message without responding. Instead, he found himself at his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. It had been years since he'd written anything that wasn't a business proposal or contract negotiation. But slowly, words began to appear on the screen. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways that I failed to show it. The poem was terrible, clunky and amateur compared to the verses he'd once written for her. But it was honest, raw with the kind of vulnerability he'd spent years avoiding. At 2 a.m., his phone rang. Naomi's name on the screen made his heart race. Caleb? I'm sorry to call so late, but something's wrong with baby A. They're taking him into surgery. The poem, his apartment, everything else ceased to exist. I'm on my way. He was dressed and in his car within minutes, speeding through empty Seattle streets toward the hospital, toward his son who was fighting for his life, toward the woman who'd been facing these terrors alone for months. As he parked outside Seattle General for the 3rd time in 2 days, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. He wasn't here out of obligation or guilt or even love for who Naomi used to be. He was here because somewhere in the space between memory and hope, he'd remembered who he used to be. And for the first time in years, that man felt worth fighting for. But first, he had to pray that his son would be okay, because losing him now, before he'd even had the chance to be a real father, would destroy whatever pieces of his heart still remained intact. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor had never seemed so harsh. Caleb found Naomi in the surgical waiting area, curled in a plastic chair that looked impossibly small, beneath the weight of her fear. She'd thrown on clothes hastily, wrinkled jeans and an oversized sweater that he recognized as one of his old ones, kept perhaps for comfort rather than sentiment. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her face was streaked with tears. She'd probably been crying since the moment she'd called him. "What happened?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. His oxygen levels dropped suddenly around midnight. "They think there might be a blockage in his intestines." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she spoke. "Dr. Harrison said it's not uncommon in preemies, but..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "But surgery on someone so small is terrifying." She nodded, finally looking at him. "I called Miranda first, but she's in Portland for work. I almost called my mom, but she'd just panic and make everything worse." She paused, vulnerability creeping into her voice. "You were the only person I wanted here." The admission hung between them like a fragile bridge. Despite everything, the divorce, the months of silence, Dr. Harrison's obvious interest when the world fell apart, she'd reached for him. "How long has he been in surgery?" 2 hours. They said it could take 4 or 5. She wrapped his old sweater tighter around herself. "I keep thinking about how tiny he is, how his whole body could fit in your hands, and they're cutting into him and..." "Hey." Caleb reached over and covered her trembling hands with his. "He's a fighter. You said so yourself. He's been fighting since the moment he was born." What if fighting isn't enough this time? The question cut straight to the heart of every parent's deepest fear. Caleb had spent his career believing that determination and strategy could overcome any obstacle. But sitting in this sterile waiting room, faced with the fragility of his son's life, he felt powerless in a way that no boardroom battle had ever prepared him for. "Then we'll face whatever comes together," he heard himself say. "But I believe he's going to make it." "How can you be so sure?" "Because he's yours, and you're the strongest person I know." Naomi's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she didn't pull her hands away from his. They sat in silence for a while, watching the clock on the wall tick away minutes that felt like hours. At 4 a.m., Dr. Harrison emerged from the surgical wing, still in scrubs but with his mask pulled down. His expression was carefully neutral, the face of a man trained to deliver both good and devastating news with equal composure. Naomi shot to her feet. "How is he?" "The surgery went well. We found the blockage and were able to remove it with minimal complications." Relief flooded his features as he continued. "He's stable, responsive, and his vitals are strong." Naomi's knees buckled slightly, and Caleb caught her elbow, steadying her as the tension she'd been holding finally released. "Can we see him?" Caleb asked. "He's in recovery now, but yes. One at a time for the first hour, then you can both visit." "You go first," Caleb told Naomi immediately. She looked surprised. "Are you sure? You've been here all night. You need to see him." After she disappeared down the corridor with Dr. Harrison, Caleb found himself alone with his thoughts for the first time since the phone call. The fear he'd been suppressing, the terror of losing a child he'd barely begun to know, hit him with devastating force. He thought about the unfinished poem on his laptop, about all the words he'd never said, about the man he'd been before ambition had carved away pieces of his soul. If tonight had taught him anything, it was that some things mattered more than empire building. Some things were worth changing for. His phone buzzed with another message from Richard. "The Yamamoto deal is dead. Call me." This time Caleb didn't delete the message. He called. "Jesus, finally." Richard's voice was sharp with frustration. "Do you have any idea how much damage control I've been doing? They think you've lost interest, that something bigger came along." "They're right." "What?" "Something bigger did come along, 3 somethings actually." "Caleb, what the hell are you talking about? This is a $150 million deal. And my son just came out of emergency surgery. Guess which one kept me awake tonight?" The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Caleb wondered if the call had dropped. "You're serious about this?" Richard said finally. "Dead serious. Look, I know this affects the company, affects you. We'll figure out the financial implications later, but I'm not apologizing for putting my family first." "Family?" "Caleb, you've been divorced for over a year. That's my problem to solve, not yours." After he hung up, Caleb felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The lightness that comes from making a decision based on love rather than logic. When Naomi returned from recovery, her face was radiant with relief and exhaustion. "He's perfect," she said, settling back into the chair beside him. "Tiny but perfect. He grabbed my finger and wouldn't let go. That's because he knows his mom saved his life by getting him here in time." "We saved his life," she corrected softly. "If you hadn't been there to drive me, if I'd had to wait for a cab. But I was there." "Yes." She studied his face with new attention. "You were, and you stayed all night. Where else would I be? 6 months ago? Probably on a conference call with Tokyo, telling yourself that throwing money at the problem was the same as being present." Her words weren't cruel, just honest. And because they were true, they didn't sting the way they might have before tonight. "6 months ago, I was an idiot who thought success was measured in dollars instead of moments. And now," Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who'd loved him when he was worth loving, who'd tried to save their marriage even when he'd stopped fighting for it, who'd carried his children and faced her fears alone because he'd convinced her that love was a burden rather than a gift. "Now I think success is measured in being the man my children can be proud of, and the man you fell in love with if that's still possible." Something shifted in Naomi's expression, a crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. "Caleb, I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I hurt you, that I wasted what we had. But sitting here tonight waiting to find out if our son was going to be okay, I realized something." "What?" "I don't want to be the father who shows up for emergencies and writes checks for everything else. I don't want to be the man who had love and let it slip away because he was too proud, or too scared, or too stupid to fight for it." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try again. Not the marriage, I know that's probably impossible after everything I've done. But I want to try being the man you once loved. I want to earn the right to be in their lives, in your life, in whatever way you'll let me." Naomi was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face as if looking for proof that his words were more than just exhaustion and fear talking. "It's not going to be easy," she said finally. "I'm not the same woman who waited for you to come home from work. I won't be again. I don't want you to be. I fell in love with your strength, your independence, your fire. I was just too blind to nurture it instead of trying to contain it. And your business, your empire, will survive with less of my attention, because some things are more important than being the richest man in the cemetery." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "That's very philosophical for 5 a.m. Near-death experiences tend to clarify priorities." Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway, and Caleb felt the familiar tension return. But this time, instead of jealousy, he felt something closer to gratitude. This man had been there when Caleb couldn't be, had cared for Naomi and his children when they needed it most. "You can both see him now," Dr. Harrison said. "And the other two are awake and asking for their parents." As they walked toward the NICU together, Naomi spoke quietly beside him. "I meant what I said about it not being easy. There's a lot of hurt to work through, a lot of trust to rebuild. I know. And there's Michael to consider. He's been very good to me." The words were like a knife, but Caleb forced himself to nod. "He seems like a good man. He is. And he cares about me. Do you care about him?" She was quiet for so long that Caleb thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, "I care about the way he makes me feel safe. But safety isn't the same thing as love." "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not." They reached the NICU where their son lay sleeping peacefully, a tiny warrior who'd already survived more in his few days of life than most people faced in years. "What should we name them?" Naomi asked suddenly. "You want me to help choose?" "They're yours too." Caleb looked at his 3 children. So small, so perfect, so completely dependent on the 2 people who'd created them in love and lost each other to pride. "What about hope names?" he suggested. "Names that mean new beginnings." "Like Felix," Naomi said softly. "It means happy, fortunate, and sage, for wisdom, and for the girl." Caleb thought about everything that had led to this moment. The love, the loss, the second chance he didn't deserve, but desperately wanted. Hope. He said simply, "Her name should be Hope." As they stood together watching their children sleep, Caleb realized that everything he'd built in his life had led to this moment. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. 3 weeks had passed since the night that changed everything. Felix, Sage, and Hope were thriving, gaining weight, breathing on their own, and showing the kind of fierce determination that made the NICU nurses shake their heads in amazement. Dr. Harrison had called them miracle babies, though his smile had been noticeably strained when he'd said it in front of Caleb. The routine had become almost natural. Caleb arrived at the hospital each morning at 7, bringing coffee for Naomi, and sitting with the babies while she showered and changed clothes. They'd developed an easy rhythm of shared feeding times, quiet conversations, and comfortable silences that felt dangerously close to the intimacy they'd once shared. What hadn't become routine was the weight of everything left unsaid between them. On this particular Tuesday morning, Caleb found Naomi in the NICU's family room, staring at a stack of papers with an expression he recognized from their marriage, the look of someone trying to solve an impossible problem. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down her usual vanilla latte. She looked up, startled from her thoughts. "Hospital bills. Even with insurance, the NICU costs are..." She gestured helplessly at the numbers. "I knew it would be expensive, but I didn't realize how expensive." Caleb glanced at the papers and felt his chest tighten. The amount was staggering, more than most people made in several years. For him, it was pocket change. For a single mother who'd been on unpaid leave for months, it was insurmountable. "Let me take care of it." "No." Her response was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not. Naomi, be reasonable. These are my children too, and I have the means." I said no. She gathered the papers into a neat stack, her movements sharp with defensive pride. "I won't be another charity case for you to manage with your checkbook. That's not what this is, isn't it?" She stood, facing him with the same fire that had made him fall in love with her. "You swoop back into my life, throw money at the problems, and expect me to be grateful? That's exactly what you used to do, Caleb. Remember the time I was worried about my student loan payments and you just paid them off without asking? Or when my car broke down and you bought me a new one instead of helping me fix the old one?" The memories hit like accusations because they were true. He had done those things, had convinced himself that providing was the same as caring, that solving problems with money was an act of love rather than control. "I was trying to help. You were trying to fix things so you wouldn't have to deal with my stress about them. There's a difference." Before he could respond, Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway. His timing was impeccable in the worst possible way, arriving just as the tension between Naomi and Caleb reached its peak. "Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to update you both on the baby's progress." His eyes moved between them, clearly sensing the conflict. "They're doing so well that we might be able to discuss discharge plans soon." "Discharge?" Naomi's voice was tight with new worry. "How soon?" "Maybe 2 more weeks if they continue gaining weight at this rate." "Have you started thinking about arrangements?" Caring for triplets is going to require significant support. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Naomi looked at Caleb, then back at Dr. Harrison, and something shifted in her expression. A decision being made that Caleb couldn't read. "Actually, Michael, I was wondering if we could talk privately about the practical aspects. The use of the doctor's first name, the way she deliberately excluded Caleb from the conversation, it was like a door slamming shut just when he thought they'd been making progress." "Of course." Dr. Harrison's relief was barely concealed. "Caleb, if you'll excuse us?" Left alone in the family room, Caleb stared at the abandoned hospital bills. The numbers seemed to mock him. All that wealth, all that power, and he couldn't even help the mother of his children without it becoming another wedge between them. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Yamamoto Industries wants to reschedule. They're offering better terms." 6 months ago, that message would have sent him into immediate action mode. Now he deleted it without a second thought and walked to the NICU window, where he could see his children sleeping peacefully in their incubators. Felix had his tiny fist pressed against his cheek, exactly the way Naomi slept. Sage was sprawled on his back with complete abandon, arms thrown wide like he owned the world. And Hope, perfect, peaceful Hope, seemed to be listening to some secret music only she could hear. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Caleb turned to find an elderly woman watching the babies with him. She had kind eyes and the comfortable demeanor of someone who'd spent decades in hospitals. "They're mine," he said, surprising himself with the pride in his voice. "First children?" "Yes, triplets." "Mercy." She shook her head with a smile. "You're going to have your hands full, but there's nothing quite like it, is there? Being a parent? I'm still figuring that out. We all are, honey. Every day." She glanced at him sideways. "You look like a man with something heavy on his mind." Something about her grandmotherly warmth made him want to confess everything. The divorce, the months of absence, the impossible task of rebuilding trust while navigating his own transformation. I made some mistakes, he said finally. Big ones. And I'm trying to figure out how to be better without making things worse. Mistakes with the baby's mama. With everything. I was so focused on providing that I forgot about being present. And now, he gestured toward where Naomi and Dr. Harrison were having their private conversation. Now someone else has been there for her in all the ways I wasn't. The woman nodded knowingly. Let me tell you something, son. I've been married to the same man for 53 years, and we've weathered storms that should have sunk us twice over. You know what I learned? Caleb shook his head. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to do the work, even when, especially when, it's hard. And sometimes the biggest act of love is stepping back and letting someone else take care of the person you love, if that's what they need, even if it kills you to do it. Even then, she patted his arm gently. But here's the thing. If it's real love, if it's meant to be, it'll find a way. You just have to trust the process and keep showing up. When Naomi emerged from her conversation with Dr. Harrison 20 minutes later, her expression was unreadable. Caleb felt his stomach clench with anticipation of whatever decision she'd made. Walk with me? She asked. They made their way to the hospital's garden courtyard, a small oasis of green in the middle of the medical complex. Naomi settled onto a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, and Caleb sat beside her, maintaining careful distance. Michael offered to help, she said without preamble. With the bills. With everything. The bills, childcare when I go back to work. A place to stay while I get back on my feet. She looked down at her hands. He has a house in Queen Anne with plenty of room. He said it would be practical, temporary, just until I figure things out. Each word felt like a physical blow. Caleb could see the logic in the offer. Dr. Harrison was stable, present, clearly in love with her. He could provide the kind of steady support that Caleb's track record suggested he might not be able to maintain. What did you tell him? That I needed to think about it. She finally looked at him. But that I had to talk to you first. Why? Because despite everything, the divorce, the hurt, the months of silence, you're still the father of my children. And because... She paused, seeming to gather courage. Because there's something you need to know. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. What? The night before you asked for the divorce, I was going to tell you something. I'd been planning it for weeks, had this whole romantic evening mapped out. Tell me what? Naomi's eyes filled with tears, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. That I was ready to start trying for a baby, ready to take that leap with you. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'd bought a onesie that said "Made with Love," and hidden it in your desk drawer with a note about how much I wanted to build a family with you. The revelation hit Caleb like a sledgehammer. All this time, he'd convinced himself that he'd set her free to find someone who wanted the same things she did. But she'd wanted those things with him, had been ready to take that step together. Naomi, the onesie is still in that drawer, Caleb. I never had the courage to throw it away. Her voice broke completely. So when you tell me you want another chance, when you say you want to be the man I fell in love with, I need you to understand what's at stake. Because I can't survive losing that man again. These babies can't survive it. Caleb reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. I found the onesie, he said quietly. She looked at him sharply. What? Last week, when I was cleaning out my home office. I found it and the note, and I couldn't understand why you'd hidden them there. I thought maybe it was some kind of joke I'd forgotten about. You found them. I've been carrying the note in my wallet ever since. He pulled out his wallet and extracted a piece of paper, worn soft from handling. Naomi's familiar handwriting was faded, but still legible. For the man who makes me believe in forever, let's make our greatest adventure yet. They sat in silence, the weight of lost time and missed opportunities settling between them like fog. I can't compete with Michael, Caleb said finally. He's everything I should have been. Present, steady, putting you first. But I can promise you this. If you give me another chance, I won't waste it. I won't let fear or pride or ambition steal what matters most ever again. And if I choose him, if I decide that safe is better than sorry, the question cut deep, but Caleb forced himself to answer honestly. Then I'll respect that decision. I'll be the best co-parent I can be, and I'll find a way to be grateful that someone else loves you the way you deserve to be loved. Naomi studied his face for a long moment, searching for something, truth maybe. Or the remnants of the man she'd once believed in completely. Michael wants an answer by tonight, she said finally. He's been patient, but he needs to know where he stands. And what are you going to tell him? I don't know yet. She stood, smoothing down her jeans. But I know that whatever I decide, I have to be sure, because this time, there are 3 little hearts depending on me to choose wisely. As they walked back toward the hospital, Caleb felt the weight of the next few hours pressing down on him. By tonight, he would know whether his second chance was real or just a beautiful impossibility. Either way, his life and the lives of his children would never be the same. The evening sky over Seattle was painted in shades of amber and rose as Naomi stood in her apartment, staring at 2 very different futures laid out before her like competing roadmaps. On her coffee table sat Michael's house key, solid, practical, representing everything sensible about choosing stability over uncertainty. Beside it lay the faded note she'd written to Caleb years ago, retrieved from his wallet earlier that day, a ghost of dreams that had once felt inevitable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Take all the time you need. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. Even in his patience, he was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. The knock at her door came at exactly 8 o'clock. Caleb's punctuality was one thing that hadn't changed. She opened it to find him standing in the hallway, and her breath caught at the sight of him. Gone was the expensive suit, the armor of success he'd worn like a second skin for years. Instead, he wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that she recognized from their early dating days. His usually perfectly styled hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his fingers through it, and his steel gray eyes held a vulnerability she hadn't seen since their wedding day. "You came," she said. "You asked me to." He stepped inside, his presence immediately making her small apartment feel even more intimate. "Besides, I couldn't let you make this decision without saying what I came here to say, which is..." Instead of answering immediately, Caleb pulled a manila envelope from inside his jacket. "First, I want to give you something." Naomi took the envelope with trembling fingers, her name written across the front in his familiar handwriting. Inside, she found a legal document that made her heart stop. "A trust fund," she whispered, scanning the numbers that blurred through sudden tears. "For the babies. Enough to cover all their medical expenses, college tuition, whatever they need. But it's structured so that you control everything. I can't touch it, can't use it as leverage, can't take it away even if..." He paused, swallowing hard. "Even if you choose Michael. Caleb, I can't accept this. It's not for you. It's for them. And it's not charity or guilt money or an attempt to buy forgiveness." He moved closer, his voice growing intense. "It's what a father does. What I should have been doing all along." She set the papers aside with shaking hands. "You said you had something to say." "I've been thinking about that night, the night I asked for the divorce. Do you know what I was really afraid of?" Naomi shook her head, though part of her had always suspected. "I was afraid that if we had children, I'd turn into my father." The words came out raw, like they'd been scraped from somewhere deep inside him. "Cold, absent, treating my family like items on a to-do list rather than people I loved. Your father wasn't..." "My father missed every birthday, every school play, every moment that mattered because work was more important. And when my mother finally left him, do you know what he said to me?" Naomi waited, sensing she was about to hear something Caleb had never told anyone. He said, "Son, love is a luxury successful men can't afford." And I believed him. I spent years proving him right. Caleb's voice cracked slightly. "But holding Felix that first night, seeing how small and perfect and completely dependent he was, I realized something." "What?" "My father was wrong. Love isn't a luxury. It's the only thing that makes success worth anything." He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't want to be the man who had everything and lost what mattered most. I want to be the man who learned the difference." Naomi felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but she couldn't seem to stop them. "And Michael? He's a good man, Caleb. He's been there when you weren't. He is a good man. And he loves you. I can see it every time he looks at you." Caleb's admission was clearly painful, but honest. "If you choose him, our children will have a stepfather who puts them first, who'll never miss their soccer games or piano recitals or graduation days. Then why are you here? Why not just let me choose the safe option?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because safe isn't what made you fall in love with me in the first place. You fell in love with the man who quoted poetry in coffee shops and proposed during thunderstorms and believed that love could conquer anything, even his own fears. That man disappeared. No, he didn't. He just got buried under a lot of bad choices and misplaced priorities." Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something for you, like I used to." Naomi's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper, recognizing immediately the terrible handwriting that had once covered dozens of love notes hidden in her textbooks and coffee cups. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways I failed to show it when it mattered most. The missed dinners, the forgotten holidays, the man I was, the father I almost lost. But love learns and hearts can find their way. Back to the truth that time cannot erase, that you are worth every single day of becoming the man who deserves your grace. I cannot promise perfect, cannot swear that I won't stumble on this path we'd choose. But I can promise to always be there, to fight for us, for them, too much to lose. So if you'll have me, if you'll take this chance, I'll spend forever learning how to dance, not to the rhythm of ambition's call, but to the music of what matters, all. By the time she finished reading, Naomi was crying openly. The poem was imperfect, clumsy in places, but it was him, the real him. The man she'd fallen in love with, who'd hidden himself away for so long, she'd started to believe he was gone forever. I know it's terrible poetry, Caleb said softly, but it's honest. It's beautiful. She looked up at him through her tears. But Caleb, what happens when the newness wears off? When the late-night feedings and sleepless nights and sheer exhaustion of raising triplets starts to wear you down? What happens when you get another offer from Tokyo or Dubai or wherever, and the old priorities start calling?
Let's go.
Then you call me on it, you hold me accountable. You remind me who I want to be. He reached for her hands, and this time she let him take them. Naomi, I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. But I can promise that I'll never stop fighting to be worthy of you and them. And if it doesn't work, if we try again and fail again, then at least we'll fail together, fighting for something beautiful instead of walking away from it. They stood there in her small apartment, surrounded by the quiet weight of possibility. Outside, the city hummed with its usual evening rhythm, but inside, the only sound was their breathing and the tick of the old clock on her mantle. Michael is waiting for my answer, she said finally. I know. He deserves honesty. He deserves someone who chooses him completely, not someone who settles for safety because she's afraid to believe in second chances. Caleb's heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying that the woman who fell in love with you wasn't looking for safe. She was looking for the man who made her believe that love could be an adventure instead of a prison. Naomi stepped closer, her green eyes bright with tears and something that looked dangerously like hope. I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, that woman is still here. And maybe that man is too. Naomi, I'm saying yes, Caleb. Yes to taking the chance. Yes to believing that people can change, that love can grow stronger instead of just growing older. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Yes to fighting for what we had and building something even better. The kiss that followed was everything their first kiss had been and more. Desperate and tender, full of promise and forgiveness, and the kind of love that survives even its own mistakes. When they finally broke apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I won't let you down again. I know, she whispered, because this time, I won't let you. As they held each other in the growing darkness of her apartment, both of them understood that they weren't just choosing to try again. They were choosing to become the people their children deserved as parents, and the people they'd always had the potential to be together. But even as happiness flooded through her, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that their hardest challenges were still ahead, because choosing love was just the beginning. Now they had to learn how to live it, day by day, with 3 tiny lives depending on them to get it right. And somewhere across the city, Michael Harrison was about to receive a phone call that would change his life as dramatically as this moment was changing theirs. Dr. Michael Harrison's house in Queen Anne was exactly what Naomi had expected. Tasteful, organized, and quietly expensive in the way that spoke of a man who'd built a successful life through careful planning and delayed gratification. As she stood on his front porch the next morning, clutching a bouquet of white roses she'd bought as a peace offering, she felt the weight of what she was about to do. The door opened before she could knock, and Michael's face lit up with the kind of hope that made her stomach clench with guilt. Naomi. He stepped aside to let her in, his brown eyes searching her face for clues. I wasn't expecting you this early. Is everything okay with the babies? They're fine, perfect, actually. She handed him the flowers, noting how his hands shook slightly as he accepted them. We need to talk. Something in her tone made his expression shift from hope to wariness. He set the roses on the hallway table with careful precision, the way surgeons handled delicate instruments. Of course, can I get you coffee? I just made a fresh pot. Please. His kitchen was a study in understated elegance. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a breakfast nook with windows overlooking Elliott Bay. It was beautiful and sterile, the kind of space that belonged in a magazine rather than a home where children spilled juice and left toys scattered across the floor. Michael moved with economical grace as he prepared her coffee, adding exactly the right amount of cream without asking how she liked it. The fact that he'd memorized such small details about her preferences only made what she was about to say more difficult. "You look different today," he said, handing her the perfectly prepared cup. "Happier, maybe?" "Michael." She set the coffee down without drinking it. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me say it all before you respond." He nodded, though she could see him bracing for impact. "These past few months, you've been everything I could have asked for in a friend, a doctor, whatever we were becoming. You've been patient and kind and present in ways that..." She paused, struggling to find words that wouldn't sound like a consolation prize, "in ways that I desperately needed." But his voice was quiet, resigned, as if he'd already guessed where this was heading. "But I can't accept your offer. I can't move in here. Can't let you help with the babies. Can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is enough to build a life on." Michael was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it might hold answers to questions he didn't want to ask. "It's him, isn't it, Caleb?" "Yes. Even after everything he put you through. Even after he walked away." Naomi felt tears threatening, but forced herself to meet his gaze directly. "Especially because of that. Because I need to know if the man I fell in love with is still there, buried under all the mistakes and misplaced priorities. I need to know if love can be stronger than fear. And if it can't, if he breaks your heart again, then at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll know I chose hope over safety." She reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "Michael, you deserve someone who chooses you not because you're the smart choice, but because they can't imagine their life without you in it. I thought you were that someone." The pain in his voice was like a physical blow. Part of me wanted to be. The part that was tired of fighting and hurting and believing in impossible things. But that's not who I really am. And it's not fair to either of us to pretend otherwise. Michael pulled his hand away and stood, moving to the window that overlooked the bay. His shoulders were rigid with the effort of maintaining his composure. "I've been in love with you since the night I delivered your babies," he said quietly. "Watching you fight for them, seeing your strength even when you were terrified, I thought maybe that was enough. That if I could just be what you needed, you'd eventually..." "Michael, I know." He turned back to face her, and she was surprised to see a small, sad smile on his lips. "I know you can't make yourself feel something that isn't there. I'm a doctor. I understand that the heart doesn't follow logical treatment plans. I'm so sorry. Don't be. You're doing the honest thing, the brave thing, even if it's not the thing I wanted to hear." They stood in his perfect kitchen, surrounded by the silence of dreams being carefully dismantled. Naomi felt the urge to say something more, to offer some comfort that might ease the sting of rejection. But she knew that anything she said would only make it worse. "Will you be okay?" she asked finally. Eventually, he managed a more genuine smile. "I'm resilient. Comes with the territory of being a doctor. You learn to lose patience and keep fighting for the next one. I'm not a patient you lost. No, you're something much more complicated than that." He moved toward her, stopping just close enough to touch her cheek gently. "You're the woman who reminded me that I still have a heart capable of breaking." The gesture was so tender, so full of genuine affection despite his pain, that Naomi felt fresh tears spill over. "I hope someday you find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved," she whispered. "I hope you do too, and I hope he's worthy of the second chance you're giving him." As she prepared to leave, Michael caught her arm gently. "Naomi, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Not for me, obviously, but for you. You light up when you talk about him, even when you're angry. You never lit up like that when you talked about me." The observation was so astute, so painfully honest, that it took her breath away. "Take care of yourself, Michael. And thank you for everything. Take care of those babies. They're lucky to have you as their mother." The drive from Queen Anne back to Capitol Hill felt like traveling between two different lives. As Naomi pulled into her parking space, she saw Caleb's Bentley already waiting, and her heart did that ridiculous flutter that it had been doing since she was 25 years old. He was sitting on her front steps looking like a man who'd spent the night alternating between panic and hope. When he saw her car, he stood immediately, his face a map of barely contained anxiety. "How did it go?" he asked as she approached.
So cool.
It went. She sank down onto the step beside him, emotionally exhausted from the morning's conversation. He was perfect about it, actually, which somehow made it worse. Do you regret it? Choosing me over him? Naomi looked at this man, her ex-husband, the father of her children, the person who'd broken her heart, and was now asking for the chance to heal it, and felt the same certainty that had carried her through the previous evening. No, but Caleb, we need to talk about expectations, about what happens now. Okay, I'm not moving back in with you. I'm not jumping back into marriage or even back into a relationship like nothing happened. We're going to take this slow, figure out how to be co-parents first, and see if we can rebuild trust from there. Whatever you need, I mean it. No grand gestures. No trying to fix everything with money or romantic poetry. Just presence, consistency, showing up when you say you will, and being the man you claim you want to be. Caleb nodded solemnly. I understand. And if at any point you decide this is too hard, if the reality of sleepless nights and dirty diapers and the complete chaos of raising triplets starts to feel like more than you bargained for, you tell me. You don't just disappear again. I won't disappear. Promise me. I promise. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that felt both familiar and startlingly new. Naomi, I know I have a lot to prove. I know words are easy and actions are what matter. But I want you to know that choosing this, it doesn't scare me anymore. What scares me is the thought of not choosing it. Good, she said softly. Because tomorrow, they come home from the hospital, and everything gets real, very quickly. Tomorrow, Dr. Morrison called this morning. Felix, Sage, and Hope have been cleared for discharge. We're about to become full-time parents to 3 very tiny, very demanding humans. The look that crossed Caleb's face was a mixture of terror and pure joy. The expression of a man realizing that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. Are you ready for that? Naomi asked. No, he admitted honestly, but I think that's probably normal. Probably. They sat together on her front steps, watching the morning bustle of Capitol Hill wake up around them. College students heading to class, professionals walking dogs before work. The ordinary rhythm of lives being lived one day at a time. What happens now? Caleb asked. Now we go to the baby store and buy 3 car seats because apparently you can't take babies home from the hospital without them. Then we figure out how to install them. And tomorrow we bring our children home. Our children. He said it like he was testing the words, seeing how they felt in his mouth. Our children, Naomi confirmed. And Caleb, whatever happens between us, whatever we become or don't become, that part isn't negotiable. You're their father. That's forever. Forever, he repeated. And this time the word didn't sound like a prison sentence. It sounded like a promise he was finally ready to keep. The baby store was a battlefield of overwhelmed parents and crying infants. But somehow Caleb and Naomi managed to navigate it with the focused determination of people on a mission. 3 car seats, 3 cribs, enough diapers to supply a small army, and an endless array of tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small for actual human beings. Do we really need 3 of everything? Caleb asked, staring at the cart overflowing with identical items in triplicate. Unless you want to spend your days washing bottles and bouncing one baby, while the other 2 scream for attention, yes. Naomi held up 2 different pacifiers. Which one do you think? It was such a normal domestic question, the kind couples asked each other every day, but it felt monumental. Caleb studied the pacifiers with the same intensity he'd once reserved for merger documents. The blue ones. They looked more sturdy? Naomi laughed. The first genuinely carefree sound he'd heard from her in years. Sturdy pacifiers. I love that your approach to baby gear is the same as your approach to business acquisitions. Quality matters, he said, defending himself, but he was smiling too. They spent the afternoon transforming Naomi's spare bedroom into a nursery, assembling cribs with the kind of focused cooperation that felt surprisingly natural. Caleb had always been good with his hands when he wasn't buried in paperwork, and watching him carefully read instruction manuals and check every bolt twice reminded Naomi of the man who'd once spent an entire weekend building her custom bookshelves. Hand me that screwdriver, he said, crouched beside the second crib. As she passed it to him, their fingers brushed, and the familiar electricity was still there, muted by time and hurt, but unmistakably present. Caleb, yeah? What if we're terrible at this? What if we're so focused on figuring out us that we mess up them? He paused in his assembly, looking up at her with those steel-gray eyes that had once made her believe anything was possible. Then we'll figure it out as we go. Together, he stood, dusting off his hands. Naomi, I've spent my entire career believing that success comes from having all the answers before you start. But maybe parenthood is different. Maybe it's about being willing to learn. That evening, they sat in her living room surrounded by baby gear, sharing Chinese takeout, and trying to pretend they weren't both terrified of what the next day would bring. My sister called, Naomi said, twirling lo mein around her chopsticks. She wants to come visit next week, help with the babies. That's good. You'll need the support. We'll need the support, she corrected gently. This isn't just my adventure anymore. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made Seattle look like a postcard. At the hospital, the discharge process was surprisingly emotional. Nurses who'd become familiar faces over the past month, saying goodbye to the tiny patients they'd helped fight for every breath. Dr. Morrison, the neonatologist who'd overseen the baby's care, shook both their hands with professional warmth. They're remarkable children, he told them. Strong, determined, clearly ready to take on the world. Just remember, call if you have any concerns, no matter how small they seem. Felix, Sage, and Hope looked impossibly tiny in their car seats, dwarfed by safety straps that had been adjusted to the smallest possible setting. They slept peacefully through the careful transfer to Caleb's car, blissfully unaware that they were about to experience their first taste of the world outside hospital walls. The drive to Naomi's apartment was the most nerve-wracking 15 minutes of Caleb's life. Every pothole felt like a catastrophe. Every turn seemed too sharp. Every other driver appeared to be a menace to his precious cargo. You're doing fine, Naomi said softly, noting his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. They're not made of glass. They're so small. They're perfect. Getting 3 car seats up 2 flights of stairs required logistical planning that would have impressed military strategists. Caleb carried 2 while Naomi managed the 3rd, both of them moving with the careful precision of people handling priceless artifacts. Welcome home, Naomi whispered as they crossed the threshold of her apartment. For the first few hours, the babies seemed content to sleep in their new environment, adjusting to the different sounds and smells of home. Caleb and Naomi moved around each other in the small space with surprising harmony, checking on the sleeping infants, unpacking supplies, and marveling at how completely their world had shifted overnight. They're so quiet, Caleb observed, peering into Hope's bassinet. Famous last words, Naomi warned. Wait until dinner time. As if summoned by her prediction, Sage began to fuss, a small sound that quickly escalated into a full-scale protest. Within minutes, all 3 babies were crying. Not the gentle mewling of newborns, but the determined wails of children who had very specific needs and no patience for delay. Okay, Naomi said, jumping into action with practiced efficiency. Felix needs to be changed. Sage wants to eat and Hope is probably just sympathizing. You take Felix, I'll handle the feeding situation. The next hour was a blur of bottles and diapers and the kind of coordinated chaos that made Caleb wonder how anyone ever managed to raise children without losing their minds. Just when they got one baby settled, another would start crying. When they finally achieved a moment of blessed silence, all 3 asleep again, they collapsed onto the couch like survivors of a natural disaster. That was, Caleb began. Just the warm-up, Naomi finished with a tired laugh. Wait until tonight when they're all awake at different times wanting different things. How did single mothers ever survive this? Badly, with lots of coffee and the occasional breakdown in grocery store aisles. As if to prove her point, Hope began to cry again. Not the hungry cry or the wet diaper cry, but the mysterious infant cry that meant something was wrong but offered no clues about what. I'll get her, Caleb said, moving toward the bassinet before Naomi could protest. He lifted Hope carefully, supporting her tiny head the way the nurses had taught him, and began to pace the small living room. The crying continued, escalating to the kind of sound that seemed designed to trigger every parental panic instinct. Try bouncing her gently, Naomi suggested. Sometimes they just want motion. The bouncing helped briefly, but then the crying resumed with renewed intensity. Caleb felt sweat beading on his forehead as he tried everything he could think of. Different positions, soft shushing sounds, even humming tunelessly under his breath. Here, let me... Naomi started to rise from the couch. No, I've got this. The words came out sharper than he'd intended, driven by a desperation to prove he could handle his own daughter. But Hope continued to cry, and Caleb felt that familiar surge of frustration, the same feeling that used to drive him to work late, rather than deal with problems he couldn't immediately solve. Caleb, Naomi's voice cut through his rising panic. Look at me. He turned to face her, still bouncing hope mechanically. You don't have to be perfect at this. You don't have to figure it out all by yourself. That's what partnership means. We help each other. The words hit him like a revelation. For so many years, he'd equated asking for help with admitting failure. But standing there with his crying daughter, he realized that parenthood wasn't about proving his competence. It was about doing whatever worked. What should I try next? He asked. Sometimes they just need to hear your voice. Not shushing or humming, but actually talking to them. Tell her about yourself, about us, about the world she's just entered. Caleb felt foolish at first, but as he began to speak softly to his daughter, something miraculous happened. Hope's crying gradually subsided, replaced by the kind of alert attention that newborns sometimes showed when they were listening to something fascinating. "Hi, Hope," he said quietly, settling into the rocking chair by the window. "I'm your dad. I know that's probably confusing since I haven't been around much, but I'm here now, and I'm going to tell you a story about your mom and me, about how we fell in love and lost each other and found our way back because of you and your brothers." Hope stared up at him with those unfocused, newborn eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing at once. Her tiny fist had found its way to her mouth, and she sucked on it contentedly while he talked. "Your mom is the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. She's going to teach you about books and poetry and how to think for yourself. And I'm going to try to teach you about integrity and hard work, and how to fight for the people you love." From the couch, Naomi watched this scene with tears in her eyes. This was what she'd imagined during those long months of pregnancy. Caleb holding their child, talking to her like she was the most important person in the world. "Keep going," she said softly when he paused. "I'm going to make mistakes," Caleb continued to hope. "Probably a lot of them, but I promise you this. I will never stop trying to be the father you deserve, and I will never, ever walk away from you or your brothers or your mother again." Hope had fallen asleep in his arms, her tiny face peaceful and trusting. Caleb sat perfectly still, afraid to move and break the spell of this perfect moment. "She knows," Naomi said quietly. "Knows what? That you love her. Babies can sense that kind of thing." As evening approached, they fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural, tag-teaming feedings and diaper changes, taking turns walking the floor with fussy babies, collapsing into brief moments of rest whenever all three children were temporarily content. Around midnight, with all three babies finally asleep, Caleb and Naomi found themselves on the couch again, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. "So," Naomi said, curled against the opposite end of the couch, "first day of parenthood. How do you feel?" Caleb considered the question seriously. He felt tired in a way he'd never experienced. Not the mental fatigue of long workdays, but the bone-deep exhaustion that came from pouring everything you had into caring for someone else. But he also felt something else, something he'd been chasing through business deals and acquisitions without ever finding. "Complete," he said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel complete. Even with the crying and the chaos and the complete loss of control over your schedule. Especially because of that." He looked at her across the small space of the couch. "Naomi, I know we're taking this slow. I know we have a lot to work through. But I need you to know, this isn't about obligation or guilt or trying to recreate what we used to have. This is about building something new, something better. What if it doesn't work? What if we try and fail again? Then at least we'll fail as a family, together." Outside, Seattle settled into its late-night quiet, but inside the small apartment, 3 tiny hearts beat steadily in their bassinets, and 2 adults sat in the darkness, no longer just co-parents or ex-spouses, but partners in the most important adventure of their lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of their fragile rebuilding trust. But tonight, for the first time in years, Caleb Hargrove was exactly where he belonged. 3 months into their new life as a family, Caleb thought he'd mastered the art of juggling parenthood with his scaled-back work schedule. The babies had settled into something resembling a routine. Naomi had started to trust him with increasingly complex tasks, and he'd even learned to change a diaper one-handed while holding a bottle. Then Richard Blackstone showed up at Naomi's apartment on a Tuesday morning, armed with a lawsuit and 15 years of partnership agreements. "You can't be serious," Caleb said, staring at the legal documents spread across Naomi's kitchen table while Felix slept against his shoulder. "Dead serious." Richard's expression was granite hard, the look of a man who'd felt betrayed by his closest friend. "You violated every clause in our partnership agreement. Missed meetings, ignored deadlines, turned down deals worth hundreds of millions. The Tokyo investors pulled out completely, and the Singapore project is dead in the water. Richard, we can work this out. We always have. Can we? Richard stood, pacing the small kitchen like a caged animal. Because from where I stand, you've already chosen. You've chosen this. He gestured around the apartment, taking in the baby bottles, the scattered toys, the beautiful chaos of family life, over everything we built together. Naomi appeared in the doorway, having put Sage and Hope down for their nap. She took in the scene immediately, the tension radiating from both men, the legal papers that looked ominous even from across the room. What's going on? Richard is suing me for breach of partnership, Caleb said quietly. He wants me to buy him out or sell my shares. Either way, it would mean liquidating everything, Richard finished. The company, the investments, all of it. You'd walk away with about 40% of what you're worth now, and I'd start over somewhere else. The implications hit Naomi like a physical blow. 40% of Caleb's current worth was still more money than most people saw in a lifetime, but it would mean dismantling everything he'd built. More than that, it would mean choosing family over empire in the most final, irreversible way possible. How long do I have to decide? Caleb asked. 72 hours. My lawyers are already preparing the paperwork. Richard's voice softened slightly. Caleb, I don't want it to come to this, but I can't carry the company alone while you play house. I'm not playing house. I'm raising my children. Same difference from a business perspective. After Richard left, the apartment felt heavy with unspoken implications. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, staring at the lawsuit papers while Felix dozed in his arms. Naomi moved around the kitchen, cleaning bottles with mechanical precision, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Say something, Caleb said finally. What do you want me to say? I don't know. That it'll be okay. That we'll figure it out. That you're not regretting choosing me over Michael. Naomi set down the bottle she was washing and turned to face him. Is that what you think? That I'd regret choosing love because it comes with complications? I think you're scared. I think you're realizing that being with me means constant crisis management, and that maybe Michael's stable predictability was actually the better option. Caleb, she moved to the table, sitting across from him. Do you want to know what I'm actually thinking? He nodded,
He's still there,
though
right?
part of him dreaded the answer. I'm thinking about the night you asked for the divorce. Do you remember what you said? I said you deserved someone who could be present. You said more than that. You said you were afraid that if you stayed, you'd drag me down with you, that your ambition would consume both of us until there was nothing left but money and regret. I remember. Well, guess what? You were right. Her words hit him like a slap. Your ambition did consume us. It consumed you so completely that you forgot who you used to be, who we used to be together. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. So you think I should take the deal? Let Richard destroy everything I've built? I think you should ask yourself what you actually built. Naomi reached across the table and touched his free hand. Did you build a company or did you build a prison? Did you create success or did you create an addiction to proving your worth through other people's definitions of achievement? That company is how I provide for you, for them. Is it? Or is it how you prove to yourself that you matter? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and uncomfortable. Felix stirred in his arms, making the soft sounds that meant he'd be awake and hungry soon. What if I choose wrong? Caleb asked quietly. What if I walk away from everything and then realize I can't be happy without it? What if I resent you, resent them for costing me my empire? Then you never really changed at all, and this was all just an elaborate performance to get your family back. Her words were gentle but uncompromising, and they forced Caleb to confront the question he'd been avoiding for months. Was his transformation real, or was he just playing the role of devoted father until the novelty wore off? That night, while Naomi slept and the babies dozed in their cribs, Caleb walked the floors of the small apartment, wrestling with the most important decision of his life. He thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago, ruthless, focused, measuring his worth in quarterly reports and acquisition deals. That man had built an empire but lost everything that actually mattered. He thought about the man he'd been 3 months ago, broken, desperate, begging for a second chance he didn't deserve. And he thought about the man he was now, changing diapers at 3 a.m., reading bedtime stories to children who couldn't understand the words, but seemed to love the sound of his voice, finding more satisfaction in making Naomi smile than he'd ever found in closing deals. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard. The offer stands until Friday. After that, it's just a legal battle that'll destroy us both. Caleb stared at the message for a long moment, then walked to Naomi's bedroom doorway. She was curled on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek, looking younger and more peaceful than he'd seen her in years. This was what he'd almost lost. This was what he'd walked away from once before, convinced that his empire mattered more than his heart. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. The next morning, Caleb called Richard from the hospital parking lot while Naomi took the babies for their 3-month checkup. "I'll take the buyout," he said without preamble. "Caleb, think about this. You're talking about giving up everything. No, I'm talking about keeping everything that matters. And when the money runs out, when the reality of middle-class life sets in, when you realize you've traded an empire for domestic mediocrity," Caleb looked through the hospital window, where he could see Naomi in the waiting room, holding Hope while Felix and Sage dozed in their stroller. She was laughing at something one of the other mothers had said, her face radiant with the kind of joy that had nothing to do with stock portfolios or profit margins. "Then I'll figure it out. But I won't be figuring it out alone. This is a mistake, Caleb, the biggest mistake of your life. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make." When Naomi emerged from the doctor's office with a glowing report on the baby's development, she found Caleb sitting in his car, staring at his phone with an expression she couldn't read. "Everything okay?" she asked as he helped her load the car seats. "I called Richard. I'm taking the buyout." Naomi stopped moving, a bottle halfway to the diaper bag. "You're what?" "I'm walking away from the company, from all of it." "Caleb, you can't make that decision because of us. That's not fair to you, and it's not fair to us either. I'm not making it because of you." He turned to face her fully, his steel gray eyes clear and certain. "I'm making it for me, because I finally understand the difference between building a life and building a lifestyle. What if you regret it? What if I don't?" He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Naomi, for the first time in my adult life, I wake up every day excited about what I'm going to do, not anxious about what I have to accomplish. That's worth more than any amount of money. And if we struggle, if money gets tight and the stress of raising 3 children starts to wear on us, then we'll struggle together, and we'll figure it out together, because that's what families do." Naomi studied his face, looking for any sign of doubt or reservation. What she saw instead was the same certainty that had made him successful in business, now focused on something infinitely more important. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. Let's build a life instead of a lifestyle. Let's see what happens when Caleb Hargrove stops trying to conquer the world and starts trying to change diapers instead." As they drove home with their 3 precious passengers, Caleb felt something he'd never experienced in all his years of corporate victories. The absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The empire was gone, but the kingdom, this small, chaotic, beautiful kingdom of bottles and bedtime stories and tiny hands that trusted him completely, was just beginning. 2 years later, the kitchen of their modest 3-bedroom house in Ballard was a symphony of controlled chaos. Felix sat in his high chair, methodically smearing banana across his face with the concentrated focus of a tiny scientist. Sage had discovered that dropping Cheerios from his tray made a satisfying sound when they hit the hardwood floor, and Hope was practicing her newest skill, clapping, with enthusiastic determination that filled the room with the rhythm of tiny hands. No, Felix declared with toddler authority, pushing away the spoon Naomi offered him. Yes, she replied with mock seriousness, making airplane noises as she guided another bite toward his mouth. "The banana needs to go in your mouth, not on your face, buddy." Caleb emerged from the laundry room carrying a basket of impossibly small clothes, his hair still damp from the shower he'd barely had time to finish before Sage had started his morning concert. He wore jeans and a Seattle University t-shirt, a far cry from the designer suits that still hung, largely unworn, in the back of their shared closet. "Any word from the publisher?" Naomi asked, expertly dodging a flying Cheerio. "They want to meet next week." Caleb couldn't quite suppress the smile that accompanied the announcement. Apparently, From Boardroom to Baby Room, A Father's Journey is exactly the kind of memoir they've been looking for. I told you people would want to read about your transformation. Our transformation, he corrected, settling Hope on his hip, while she continued her applause performance. Nobody wants to read about a man who figured out how to love his family. They want to read about how love can completely remake a person if you're brave enough to let it. The past 2 years had been a masterclass in redefinition. The financial adjustment had been more dramatic than either of them had anticipated. Their current house cost less than Caleb used to spend on a single business dinner. but the richness of their daily life had more than compensated for the smaller bank account. Caleb had discovered that his talent for organization and strategic thinking translated beautifully to managing a household with 3 toddlers. He'd become a master of meal prep, nap schedules, and the complex logistics required to get 3 children dressed and out the door for anything more ambitious than a trip to the backyard. More surprisingly, he'd found his voice as a writer. What had started as a journal to process his dramatic life changes had evolved into essays about modern fatherhood, work-life balance, and the courage required to choose love over legacy. The book deal was modest by his former standards, but the validation of knowing his story might help other fathers find their way back to their families felt more valuable than any acquisition he'd ever completed. "Miranda called this morning," Naomi said, wiping Felix's face with practiced efficiency. "She wants to bring the kids over this weekend. Apparently cousin bonding time is essential for proper social development. Translation: she wants to spoil our children and then send them home on a sugar high." "Exactly," Naomi grinned, the expression lighting up her face in a way that still made Caleb's heart skip. "I told her yes, obviously. Hope needs more female role models in her life. She has you. That's all the role modeling she needs." It was true. Watching Naomi navigate motherhood had been like watching someone discover a superpower they'd always possessed but never had occasion to use. She approached parenting with the same intelligence and creativity she'd once brought to teaching literature, finding ways to make even the most mundane tasks feel like adventures. She'd returned to work part-time when the babies turned 18 months, teaching 2 classes at Seattle University while Caleb managed the household. The role reversal had felt natural rather than forced, a practical division of labor based on passion and aptitude rather than traditional gender expectations. "Speaking of hope," Caleb said, "I think she's trying to tell us something." Their daughter had stopped clapping and was now pointing with intense concentration toward the living room, babbling in the urgent tone that all parents learned to recognize as important communication. "What is it, sweetheart?" Naomi asked, following Hope's gaze. Through the living room window, they could see a familiar figure walking up their front path. Dr. Michael Harrison, looking polished and professional in his scrubs, carried a small wrapped box and wore the slightly nervous expression of a man about to deliver news. "He texted yesterday," Naomi explained, noting Caleb's raised eyebrows. "Said he had something to tell us." They'd maintained a careful friendship with Michael over the past 2 years. Careful because the romantic history was impossible to ignore, but genuine because he'd proven himself to be exactly the kind of man who could separate his personal disappointment from his professional integrity. He'd continued to be the children's pediatrician, had sent thoughtful gifts on their birthdays, and had even joined them for dinner a few times when Naomi thought he looked too lonely for his own good. "Should I be worried?" Caleb asked, but his tone was teasing rather than threatened. "Only if you're worried about him asking you to be his best man." "His what?" The doorbell rang before Naomi could elaborate, and she headed for the front door with a smile that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Michael stood on their doorstep, his usual composed demeanor slightly cracked by what appeared to be nervous excitement.
What?
"Hey guys, sorry to drop by unannounced, but I couldn't wait to share the news." "Come in," Naomi said, stepping aside. The kids were just finishing breakfast and Caleb was about to start the morning chaos management. "Actually, that's perfect timing." Michael held up the wrapped box. "I brought something for them, but first I need to tell you both something." They gathered in the living room, the 3 adults sitting while Felix, Sage, and Hope explored the fascinating possibilities offered by a coffee table, a magazine rack, and the eternal entertainment value of trying to put things in their mouths. "I'm getting married," Michael announced, his face breaking into the kind of smile that transformed his entire appearance. "Michael," Naomi jumped up to hug him. "That's wonderful. Who is she? When did this happen?" "Her name is Sarah Chen. She's a trauma surgeon at Harborview. We met during a really difficult case about 6 months ago and..." He shrugged helplessly. "It sounds like a cliche, but I knew she was the one I'd been waiting for." Caleb stood to shake Michael's hand, genuinely pleased by the news. "Congratulations, man. I'm happy for you." "Thanks. That means a lot, actually." Michael's expression grew more serious. "I want you both to know that meeting Sarah, falling in love with her, it made me understand something important about what happened between us." He looked at Naomi directly. "I was never really in love with you. I was in love with the idea of being the man who could save you, who could be everything your ex-husband wasn't. But that's not love. That's ego with good intentions." "Michael, let me finish. Sarah doesn't need saving. She's brilliant and independent and challenges me to be
No,
better
man,
every
it
day.
is not you.
Not because I'm trying to prove something,
Okay, I
but
don't know if
because
you
she
were here
inspires
yesterday.
me to want to grow. And watching you two
There was a
together,
game
seeing how
where
you've built this life, I
all of a
realize
sudden
that's
I
what
was-
real
I had
love
two
looks
people
like.
on me.
It's not
And
about
I
being
went to go
needed.
Shockwave.
It's about
And I
choosing
switched
each other
my
every
Shockwave. You
day,
can I
even
went
when
into
it's
replays to
difficult.
check this out. I
The
went to my
conversation was
Shockwaves,
interrupted by
looked
Hope,
down,
who had crawled over to
threw
Michael and was
them,
now pulling
went through
herself
the
up using his leg as
animation of throwing
support.
them,
She
leaves
stood
my
there
hand.
wobbling
You can see the
slightly,
Shockwave, like,
looking
leave
up
my
at him
hand,
with the kind
and
of
then I'm just like this.
unself-conscious affection
I'm
that
just doing that.
toddlers gave freely. She
And I'm just
remembers
getting,
you,
like,
Naomi
just
said
absolutely
softly.
destroyed.
Of course she does. I'm her favorite
And it's just
doctor.
like,
Michael picked up Hope,
not just you.
who immediately grabbed his
It's not just
stethoscope
you.
and began
This
examining it
game
with intense curiosity.
sucks.
Actually, that's part of why I'm here. Sarah and I would love to have all of you at the wedding. And afterwards, when we get back from our honeymoon, we'd love to have you over for dinner. I think you'd really like her. We'd love that, Caleb said, meaning it completely. After Michael left, promising to send wedding details soon, Caleb and Naomi worked together to clean up the breakfast destruction while the children played in their child-proofed living room. How do you feel about that? Caleb asked, loading the dishwasher
Yeah, it
with
is
practiced
definitely not just
efficiency.
you thing.
About Michael getting married? I feel happy for him, and maybe a little vindicated.
onto something?
Vindicated how? I told him once that he deserved someone who chose him completely, not someone who settled for safety. Sounds like he found her. Caleb dried his hands and turned to face her. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd made a different choice? If you'd chosen safety over the chaos of trying again with me?
Oh, it's New Year's somewhere.
Naomi considered
That's
the
what's
question
happening. What is
seriously,
going on here?
her eyes moving to where their 3 children were engaged in the complex negotiations of toddler society. Who got which toy? Who
Okay,
got
yeah,
to
that's
sit in
right.
the
Okay, this is
prime
New
real
Year's.
estate of the sunny spot by the window?
Normal.
Who got to
This
be
is
the
normal.
leader in whatever elaborate
can't
game
do
they'd
anything.
invented?
I
I think I
can't
would have
change
been
weapons. I
comfortable,
can't.
she said finally. I think I would have been safe and cared for and probably content, but I don't think I would have been happy. Not the way I am now. Even with the financial stress, even with the uncertainty
scary,
about
though.
the future,
That's scary.
especially because of those things. She moved closer to him, her hands finding their way to his chest in a gesture that had become automatic over the years. Caleb, do you know what the difference is between contentment and happiness?
Hush, nice, okay.
Tell me. Contentment is getting what you think you want. Happiness
Yeah,
is
and
discovering that what you
I
thought
was
you wanted was
outraged.
nothing compared to what you actually needed.
Like I said, I
And what
went
did
through
you actually
replays,
need?
and I'm like, what
This,
the heck happened?
us,
And sure
the
enough,
beautiful mess of loving someone
was
so
not
much
a
that
me
you're willing to
thing.
reinvent your entire life to keep
Okay, so
them.
yeah, it's not
She
a
stood on
you
her toes
thing.
to kiss him softly.
But I
I
was
needed to remember that the best
certain
things in life are worth fighting
had to wear
for,
my Shockwave.
worth risking
And then I
everything
ended up
for,
dying.
worth choosing again and again even when it's scary. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a crash from the living room, followed by Sage's delighted laughter and Felix's indignant protest. Hope apparently had discovered that books made excellent missiles when thrown with sufficient enthusiasm.
some,
Duty
grenades,
calls, Caleb said with a laugh, heading toward the
can throw
domestic
at them.
crisis. Wait, Naomi caught his arm. Before we go referee toddler warfare, I need to tell you something. Something in her tone made him pause. What is it? I've been thinking about Michael's
wonder if a
news,
snowball launcher
about
would
new
work.
beginnings and taking chances and all of that. And I think it's time for us to stop taking things slowly. It's time for us to stop testing whether this is real and start living like we know it is. Caleb's heart began to race. What are you saying? I'm saying that I don't want to be Naomi Carter anymore. I want to be Naomi Hargrove again. I want to marry you again, properly this time, with our children there, and all our friends, and a celebration of everything we've learned about love. Are you
Ow!
proposing to me? I guess I am.
She stuck me with
She
that.
smiled, the expression radiant with confidence and hope. So what do you say, Caleb Hargrove? Want to marry me again for all the right reasons this time? Another crash from the living room, this one followed by Felix's victory cry, reminded them that their romantic moment was taking place in the middle of a toddler battlefield. But somehow that made the proposal even more perfect. Real life, messy and beautiful, and completely theirs. Yes, Caleb said, kissing her again as their children provided a chaotic soundtrack in the background.
Not about
Yes
to
to marrying
see,
you again.
like, I was
Yes
not
to
full
building
health.
this life together.
Was not
Yes
about
to
take on a
everything.
fight of
As they headed into the
what's
living
coming,
room to
coming up
restore
there.
order, Caleb marveled at how completely his definition of success had changed. 2 years ago, success had meant power, wealth, the ability to control outcomes and dominate markets. Now, success looked like 3 toddlers who trusted him completely, a woman who loved him enough to fight for their future, and the daily choice to show up for the people who mattered most. The empire
If I
was
got rid of
gone,
that guy, though,
but the kingdom,
anyone
this
who
small,
uses the-
loud, perfect kingdom, was everything he'd never known he
Our lighting
wanted.
just needs to
And
go
for the
away.
first time in his life, Caleb Hargrove understood the difference between having everything and having what mattered. What made you believe that second chances in love are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support
Jake, I'm
mean a
so
lot to
sorry.
us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.
Ooh, gold